Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone to the Native Center for Behavioral Health. My name is Ella Driscoll, and today Dr. Avis Garcia will be presenting The Strength of Our People, Resilience of Native Americans, Part 2. This training series is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. We are part of the MHTTC network, which is located out of Iowa City, Iowa. This project is supported by SAMHSA, and the content developed by the presenter and the opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native ATTC. In the next couple of days, we will send out a follow-up email to everyone who attended, which includes a link to the recording, the handout of the slides, and a CEU request form. Our center is a NADAC certified educational provider, and we'd be happy to provide you with CEUs. We are currently waiving any fees for CEUs during the pandemic, and when we send out our follow-up email, it will contain instructions for ordering your certificate. You will be redirected to our GIPR survey evaluation at the end of this session. This survey takes just a few minutes to complete and asks about your satisfaction with the event. This feedback is critical to our future work, and we value your opinion, and we would just greatly appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts with us. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar. You can use the chat feature to share where you are from and make comments about the presentation if you would like. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions for our presenter, and we will address questions at the end of the presentation. Dr. Avis Garcia is an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho Nation and affiliated with the Eastern Shoshone Tribe of Wyoming. She earned a doctorate in counselor education and supervision at the University of Wyoming, and she is also a licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction therapist. For 19 years, she has been a mental health provider in the treatment of Native American youth and families. So welcome, Dr. Garcia, and welcome to all of our audience.
Thank you.
Go ahead and get your slides. And we can get started. Go. All right. Did those come up okay?
Yes, they did.
Oh, okay.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Oh, I thought they were sharing. Let me try this again.
Okay.
Here. Does that work better?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to be here to listen to the presentation that I have to share with you all. It is a holiday for me in the workplace, and so this was a perfect time for me to be doing a presentation. And the first presentation that I did on resiliency was more of a general presentation focused more at the adult population. And this presentation is focused more towards our youth and children, although I will make references to elders and adults here and there. But what brought me to study resiliency was when I returned to the university in 2013 to pursue my doctorate. Prior to that, I was a director of a substance abuse prevention program on my reservation. And for the first year of my project, I did an epidemiological study of my reservation for an entire year, just researching data to find what could be contributing factors to substance abuse so that we could focus on prevention efforts in our tribal community. In doing that, I was really shocked at some of the data that I never really took a good look at. And one of the things that I discovered was we had a 50% graduation rate of high school students, which means 50% of those were dropouts. And I've shared with you all before that I'm a high school dropout. I'm one of them that dropped out, but later went back. And after I learned some hard lessons in life that I wasn't going to get anywhere unless I put my head to doing some work. And that's why I went back to the reservation. But one of the questions I was asked when I got my first GA, and a GA is a graduate assistantship that helps pay your tuition, gives you a little stipend to live on. And for me, it provided medical insurance. So it helped me to pay for my schooling. But one of the questions I was asked for that GA was they wanted me to help address why the college students had an 80% dropout rate at the University of Wyoming. So that, of course, that was even more shocking to me. And my response to them was, I don't know, but I will find out. I will study this. And so that ended up being the whole focus of my dissertation. And I was mainly focused on the students from the Wind River Reservation that attended the University of Wyoming and what factors were helping them to be successful in completing their degrees. So that's just the beginning of how I got into resiliency. So we'll start with the slides. All of my work that I do is based on research. I do a lot of research. I'll spend hours getting on the internet, and I still have access to the university library, so I get whatever I can out of that. And so I use science behind what I speak. And I also let people know that I don't speak for all Native Americans across the country. I speak from my viewpoint as a Northern Arapaho person and part Shoshone from the Wind River Reservation. So, you know, my intentions are not to offend anybody who's from a different part of the country. And I'm not here to preach to the choir. I mean, take what works for you and leave what doesn't. This presentation is an overview of some of the research that I pulled up on youth resiliency. Strengths and protectives will be discussed. Contextual influences will be explored, as well as history, a bit on intergenerational trauma, the influence of acculturation, and social, economic, and political issues, and overview some common presenting issues and offer some recommendations for working with youth to increase resiliency. You go to the next slide. This presentation will offer a better understanding of Native youth. It's important to hear and understand their voices, their stories, and experiences as they experience it. Examination of internalizing and externalizing Native youth experiences and difficulty. The population of Native Americans represents only 1% of the US population. And then if many of you saw on CNN, we're 6% something else. And we have more than 566 federally recognized tribes. And I remember when I first returned to college several years ago, there were approximately like 344 tribes at that time. So several who didn't have federal recognition or had lost it have regained it or obtained it. So that's such a huge increase, which is awesome. There are also 324 federally recognized reservations, and the reservation I come from is 2.5 million acres, and we border into the Fremont County area. So we have several towns that borders our reservation. You can go to the next slide. Some more demographics. some of the largest tribes, some of you already know: Navajo, Cherokee, Choctaw, Sioux, Chippewa, Apache, Blackfeet, Iroquois, and Pueblo, in that order. About 33.9% of our population is under the age of 18. So that's a huge number of our youth that we really need to focus our efforts on. The next largest group, 30.9%, are between the age of 25 and 44. And just a small percentage is over the age of 65. So our elders are few. 8% of Native American children live with their grandparents. And I was one of them that lived with my grandparents. My grandparents raised me, and it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just the way we live our lives. And more than half of the grandparents raised their grandchildren for longer than 5 years. I just decided I like to be at my grandma's house more than anything. So I just went there and stayed there. You can go to the next slide. Native scholars have written about the ongoing effects of generational and intergenerational trauma on Indigenous people, their families, and tribal communities. These scholars have consistently described the challenges that Natives encounter as they navigate the world that is drastically different than our own tribal cultures. So, of course, we're at a greater risk than peers of other ethnicities for a variety of adverse outcomes: suicide, violence, and mental health problems. Our communities have high rates of unemployment, poverty, physical and mental health disparities, violence, and lower levels of educational attainment. Researchers continue to identify the links between historical trauma and feelings of anxiety, depression, anger, and avoidance. You can go to the next slide. We're talking about resilience, and this is two examples of two case scenarios. The first one is John. They're both 17-year-old Native youth. John, his father left his family when he was 4. Now his mother and younger sister live in poverty, struggling to make ends meet. Despite the stress in John's life, he's on the track to receive his high school diploma, and at the end of the school year, he has plans to attend college in the fall. Mike, on the other hand, from the same reservation, similar family structure, unlike John, Mike struggles to make it through each day. He has a criminal record, frequently experiments with drugs, dropped out of school after the 8th grade, and he appears unable to break the at-risk cycle. Go to the next slide. Why is one resilient and the other vulnerable? 1/2 and 2/3 of youth faced with adversity are capable of transforming their lives to become successful, productive adults. So it doesn't mean because you dropped out of high school that you're never going to do anything good in your life. And I'm one of those as living proof of that fact. We can overcome adversity. We can go to the next slide. Despite the challenges, Native communities across the US seek to transcend experiences of trauma and loss by embracing cultural practices that have sustained Native people for centuries. Nonetheless, the tensions exist between the tribal world and that of the mainstream society that remains a constant challenge for our Native youth. We need to focus efforts towards renewal through cultural and community-based intervention models. There are wellness centers based on healing concepts, as well as culture and language immersion schools. At the heart of these efforts is the ongoing cultural belief that our children are sacred. Surrounded by strong, extended kin networks, participating in traditional ceremonies that contribute to a sense of belonging and identity, and learning wisdom from our elders. You can go to the next slide. I might also mention that a lot of the efforts that were taking place on our reservation have basically come to a halt because of the COVID. Every summer we would have our camps where a lot of elders participated in the camps by teaching language, teaching cutting meat, teaching crafts. We had a horse riding program, and it saddens me to realize how much of an impact this pandemic has affected our communities. But looking at Native strengths and context, Good Luck in 2002 identified 42 specific strengths that were combined into 3 categories. The body of literature tends to be from a deficit perspective, meaning they're looking at all the problems that we have. And that tends to focus on struggles and obstacles rather than our cultural strengths. So I always try to look at the bright side of things and focus on the positives that we have. This meta-analysis focused on identifying strengths. These 3 categories that were identified by Good Luck in their research were extended family, spirituality, and social connectedness. Go to the next slide. Before anyone can begin to apply conventional psychological principles and theories to an Indigenous group, they need to understand its unique ways of life and thinking. Although Natives face many obstacles, members also possess many strengths that have helped them survive racism. Looking at our strengths here, as we've survived racism, forced relocation, and genocide. This is from Braveheart. She's done a lot of research on trauma. But we're no longer just surviving, but we're thriving in many areas. According to recent research, about 55% of Natives own their own home. 70% have graduated high school. 11.3% have a bachelor's degree. 3.9% have earned a graduate degree. About 24% finish college in 4 years, and 41% finish in 6 years. So some people, it takes a little longer, and that was the case in my situation. Other challenges are 85% of students that are Native American receive some sort of federal grant aid, compared to 69% of those that are not Native. 62% of Natives take out some kind of student loans, compared to 50% of those that are non-Native. And we're also less likely to be prepared for college. In 2017, 21% of Native children in the household under the age of 18 had a parent who completed a bachelor's degree, are higher compared to 52% of white households. And I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandmother had an 8th grade education and my grandfather had a 6th grade education. So I also want to point out that I don't define success and resiliency by educational attainment or what someone has, because the most of what I learned I like to give my grandparents credit for that. And not having anyone in my family to teach me about college experience. My first year of college was a total failure. I completely failed. So I like to put that out there too, because I know there's other people who've not finished, and to give them hope to go back, because I had to really want to go back after I was a single mom with children to provide for. We could go to the next slide. I really like that a lot of the research that I was looking at takes this strengths-based perspective. So when we're working with Native American people, especially our youth or those that are at risk, we really want to focus on what strengths those people have, not what's wrong. Uh, Native people have always believed in and encouraged the potential of their people and embraced the concept of resiliency long before it was named resiliency. And this was a quote I took out of a study by Heavy Runner and Morris. A collection of principles, ideas, and techniques that are evolving. Our strengths honors the power of the self to heal and right itself with the help of the environment, the need for healthy alliances, and hope that life can get better, and that there is a need to identify our strengths and resources of our people. Go to the next slide. Resiliency has an assortment of definitions that are related to the individual's responses to adverse conditions. The challenge facing schools is how to facilitate resiliency in youth. So, some definitions that I found were the ability to cope with stress, a positive capacity of an individual to respond under pressure. Most studies suggest a dynamic process that enables an individual to respond or adapt under adverse conditions. These conditions can include social, emotional, economic, and personal aspects. Oh, I see a typo there, sorry. Research tends to associate resiliency with positive outcomes, independent of at-risk status, competent responses under adverse conditions, and recovery after trauma. So having hope. Resilient youth successfully adapt to school environment in spite of poverty, family factors, and our social issues. You can go to the next slide. More on the study I looked at from Heavy Runner and Morris. This traditional process is what contemporary researchers, educators, social service providers are now calling resilience. The word is new, but Native American people know this as a great strength, but the meaning is old. Resilience has come from Western teaching. The quote I really liked was, "Cultural resilience is a new term, but it's a concept that predates the so-called discovery of our people. The elders teach us that our children are gifts from the Creator, and it's family, community, school, and tribe's responsibility to protect, nurture, and guide them. The resilience is not new to our people. It's a concept that has been taught for centuries. The word is new, but the meaning is old." Go to the next slide. Indigenous ways of knowing is a prevailing sense of indigeneity or Indianness based on common worldview and common history that binds Native Americans together as a people of many peoples. And this is by more recent research by Garrett Walking Stick and Terrell Portman. Terrell Portman was actually my mentor in my PhD program through a mental health program that I received a scholarship from. And that was, I think, a really good effort that continues to provide scholarships to not only Native Americans, but other people of color in pursuing their PhD and master degrees in counseling and psychology. Indigenous knowledge forms have allowed tribal groups to maintain their existence in specific geographic locations over time. So this is the stuff you learn at home. Most of this indigenous knowledge comes from grandparents or great-grandparents, or participating in our ceremonies where we learn from those who are there to help us and guide us. We go to the next slide. In mainstream American society, worth and status are based on what you do or what you have accomplished or what you have. As a result, traditional Native people are likely to describe some aspect of their family, tribal heritage, or tribal heritage when they're asked to talk about themselves. Cultural identity is rooted in tribal membership, community, and culture rather than personal achievements, social or financial status, and acquired possessions. Most Native youth The extended family, about 3 generations, and the tribal group take precedence over all other affiliations. The tribe is an interdependent system of people who perceive themselves to be connected members of a greater whole rather than individual parts. For Native Americans, who you are is where you come from. Traditional natives believe if you know my family, clan, or tribe, then you know me. The next slide. Family. Non-natives often ask, what do you do? They want to know what your job is because they're going to make a judgment on you based on what your occupation is. That's how I see it. Native people will probably ask, where do you come from? Who's your family? Who do you belong to? Who's your people? Who's your parents is one I often ask. Family may or may not consist of blood relatives. It's common for Indian people to claim non-blood related persons as a relative, welcoming him or her as a legitimate family member. Family can be a matter of both blood and spirit. It's not unusual to be raised in several households over time. And as I was writing this, it made me realize that throughout my life, we've had several different family members come and stay at my grandparents' house for whatever reason. I didn't really know, but all I remember was the time they came to stay. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and other family members take responsibility of raising children responsibly. My grandparents told me, when your children bring their friends, you treat their friends just like your children. So I would often see my uncle's friends come into the house and they would just go right to the cupboard and help themselves to coffee or whatever, because they made themselves at home there. And that was how my grandparents treated them, was like family. And one of my uncles that I call my uncle, I didn't realize he was really not a blood relative until my grandparents explained to me that they adopted him because he didn't have a mom when he was growing up. And we're still really close. He's always going to be my uncle. Next slide. Okay, the wisdom keepers. These are our elders. They are the keepers of our sacred ways. They're protectors, mentors, teachers, and support givers. Our Native communities honor our elders. We give them the highest respect. We recognize that they have a lifetime's worth of knowledge and experience. They function as parents and teachers, community leaders, and spiritual guides. And we often refer to our elders as grandmother and grandfather. And this is to refer to a very special relationship that is characterized by deep respect and admiration for each other. The special relationship is based on mutual respect and caring between the elders and the children. Next slide. Spiritual ways. This is by no means a comprehensive list. It does provide insight into some of the assumptions that may be held by a traditional Native client. Garrett in 2014 described unwellness as a disease as a result of imbalance. So when we look at our spiritual ways, we often refer to our higher power as a creator, great spirit, our grandfather. Plants, animals, and inanimate beings like rocks, or should be animals, are also part of the spirit world. The spirit intermingles with the physical world. Humans have a mind, body, soul, and spirit. Wellness is indicated through experience of balance and harmony at the physical, mental, soul, and spiritual levels of human existence. Natural unwellness is caused by violation of a sacred law. So sometimes when people are struggling, I've heard them say, maybe it's because I did this or I did that, or this happened to me, and looking at some other reason they could be struggling. Unnatural unwellness is caused by some believe conjuring witchcraft from those with destructive intentions. Each of us are responsible for our own wellness. All of these facets, the mind, body, and spirit of the human experience, are interconnected. Therefore, illness affects all of these parts of your body, parts of our life. So we can go on to the next slide. A lot of attention is being paid to historical trauma and healing. Helping professionals should inquire as to what ways family and intergenerational history might be playing a part in what brings a client into them for services. Both prevention and treatment should focus on ameliorating the historical trauma response and fostering a reattachment to traditional Native values. These values can serve as protective factors to limit or prevent both substance abuse as well as further transmission of trauma across generations. I've talked in other presentations about biogenetic research being able to prove that historical trauma can be passed on through just our blood, our genes, our genetics. So some people are still struggling with that. So practices to help with resiliency should be to improve parenting skills and promote parent-child relationships. Improved relationships across generations may serve as a protection against substance abuse and the transfer of historical trauma response to children. Native ceremonies require discipline and commitment, delaying gratification, and provide Native youth with healthy role models. Historical trauma and unresolved grief, HTUG is the acronym that addresses risk and protective factors for substance abuse through psychoeducational interventions that seek to restore attachment to traditional values. Next. This HTUG model is created by Braveheart in 2005. It's also used to help with post-traumatic stress disorder treatment. So the interventions are similar to treating PTSD, where mastery and control are taught, often with the traditional retreat-like setting that provides a safe and effective containing space. They are exposed to content through audio-visual material, provides cognitive integrations of trauma, as well as effective cathartic work that is necessary for healing. Traditional prayer ceremonies are incorporated throughout, afford emotional containment and increased connection to Indigenous values and a pre-traumatic tribal past. The next slide. By educating themselves about the history of tribes, they can come from helping tribes where they come from. Helping professionals can better understand the impact of institutional racism and acculturation, as well as the meaning of the Native American experience for any given client, and begin the healing process that incorporates culture as a central focus. So doing these parenting sessions, integrating parenting, it shows that preliminary trauma and grief resolution, a decrease in hopelessness, as well as an increase in joy. It increases a positive tribal identity, increases protective factors, and decreases the risk factors for substance abuse. It improves parental relationships with children and family relationships across generations. Perceived improvement in parenting skills, family connection, and sensitivity to one's children. And when I was working on the reservation, I thought this was really interesting because I've done this before I read this, was one of our adolescent programs that we had was we incorporated a sweat lodge and we had a talking circle. And oftentimes, some of our youth whose parents, wanted to be supportive of their children would come and participate in the sweat. And I thought it was a really good place for them to learn and bond. And it made me feel good when the parents continued to return to our sweat with their children and that they shared that with each other. And even now back home, our recovery programs encourage them to bring their family in, bring their children along. And so it always makes me feel good when some of our recovery clients come to the sweat lodge and they made it a point to bring their children with them so that they have that time to bond together in a traditional manner. We can go to the next slide. Looking at our communication style, especially if the person is speaking, such as a respected elder or anyone in a position of authority. In order to understand more of what is meant and less of what is actually said, oral recitation is common. It's a time when listeners are expected to be silent in an attempt to be respectful of traditional Native people. Our style of communication emphasizes nonverbal communication over verbal communication. I've often consulted with therapists who work on our reservation who are not Native and they don't understand our style of communication. There needs to be a moderation. It should be in speech. Sorry, I'm seeing these typos after the fact. And avoidance of direct eye contact are nonverbal communicators of respect to the listener. So not looking at them directly as it's expected in mainstream culture, that's a way of showing respect to the person by not looking at them directly. They might be a teacher, our elder. Careful listening and observation should be exercised. Storytelling is common, used to express feelings, beliefs, and the importance of experience. And that's how I teach. I'm also a storyteller. This is how I learned growing up. Listeners are expected to be silent, patient, and reflective. Direct confrontation is avoided. Asking questions, interrupting, speaking for others, telling others what to do, or arguing are common in mainstream society, but those go against what traditional Native people have been taught as respectful and appropriate ways of interacting with each other. I have educated the faculty when I got my PhD that one of my classes I got a lower grade than what I was expecting, and one of the reasons was they wanted to hear from me more. And as time went on, I taught them that I am listening, I am paying attention, but our culture, we're taught to respect you by being quiet and sitting there and listening. So I would always be a little annoyed by usually someone who was not Native in the room who was doing all the talking and seemed to be the person that knows it all, because I swear I saw one in every class that I was in. But the teachers appreciated me in the end because they said they weren't even aware of that. So I know there's a lot of faculty at the university that may still be judging our students as people that aren't fully participating when in fact they are. We can go to the next slide. Native humor. This is a big part of our life. We're not stoic people as society tends to stereotype us. We're alive and well. Humor is a critical function in our daily interaction, and it's a style with our youth. It helps youth to survive. It helped us to survive a great deal of adversity over the years. Humor is a critical part of our culture. I know many of you have probably, if you're on social media, have probably seen a lot of the memes that people have made in response to the 6% something else. And that was our laughing at it because that's what we do. Humor helps us to get through things. It's a critical part of our culture, especially at meal times. We often laugh and tease each other and share stories. Our oral traditions communicate important life lessons with subtle humor expressed in the stories. And there are often arrogant, manipulative, vain, clown-like figures in some of our storytelling, such as the rabbit, the possum, and the coyote that teaches hard lessons of humility. Laughter helps to relieve stress, and it creates an atmosphere of sharing connectedness. And if you want to see some good Native humor, I would suggest that you get on YouTube and just type in Native American Comedy Slam. And Don Burnstick, he's on Facebook, but he has some videos. And James and Ernie, I love listening to Native comedy. And of course, I find it even more funny when just as Native people get it and other people don't quite understand what's going on. On to the next slide. There is no single risk factor that can be identified to reduce dropouts. Mechanisms that would facilitate resiliency in children include strong intergenerational bonds, expectation of productive roles in work and leadership opportunities, positive engagement in church, school, and community life, close ties with grandparents and involvement with your extended family, and strong family connections within the community. And schools can promote all of these. Next slide. I'm noticing time is starting to go, so I might go a little faster, and I apologize. I think it's important that I cover as much as I can. To increase the resiliency of our teenagers, some of the factors that stood out in one of the studies that I read was what was discovered by some of the resilient students was none of them watched TV on a regular basis, even if it was available. Many had chosen a role model. 40% of those role models came from their nuclear family. 89% chose something that they excelled in many more than one skill. So they're able to say a lot about what they're capable of doing. They know what their strengths are. So a lot of times when I'm working not with just a Native person, whenever they can't tell me what strengths they have, I'm really concerned. So then that I always zero in on that of, okay, we need to build up this person's self-esteem. And so a lot of times, you know, some of our teenagers are resilient and have high self-esteem, so they can just spew out a whole bunch of things that they're capable of doing. And I like to see that. About 51% of the youth believed that they were good at sports. Basketball is a big thing in my community back home for all ages. 92% felt that education was very important. 87% valued having a job. 75% engaged in sports and exercise. Students believed that their parents had values that were similar to theirs. And 100% of these teenagers said their parents valued education. These are things that could be taught at workshops and trainings related to these skills, along with follow-ups and evaluation of those programs to see how well they're working. Next slide. Some other characteristics that were identified by Oswald, Johnson, and Howard in '99 observed resiliency among children with the presence of family support, which is very important. Some children are very resilient even with unsupportive circumstances. The other characteristics were identified were stable peer relationships. So these are youth with good friends. You know, their friends are very important to our kids as they're growing up. Problems, they had good problem solving skills. They had realistic future plans. They had a positive sense of their own ability to achieve and effectively deal with tasks. They've had some successful experiences in life already. They have an ability to communicate effectively. And this one stands out really big, even in college resiliency that I studied when I did my dissertation, is that a strong attachment with at least one adult, just one adult is all it takes. Being accountable for themselves and their actions. So I like to say my one adult was my grandmother. She was my my role model and my support and everything that I needed when I was growing up. And now that I'm a grandma, I'm there for my grandchildren in the same way. Next slide. Some other factors that focused on family and school support were some external support systems. I like to think that youth programs on the reservation are places that our youth will go to, just to have support. Our schools are critical to influencing resiliency because of academic achievement can impact and serve as a predictor of resilience. So education is key to resilience. Schools, important social and cultural activities, and environmental sites for the development of student resiliency. Research findings revealed that female students were more resilient, and this was using research instruments. And they also had higher GPAs than male students. And as I did my dissertation research, I discovered that a lot of females across the nation hold more degrees than a lot of our males. So that led to why I studied the males of my tribe. I thought, a lot of our women are getting degrees and becoming school teachers and other, influential people in our community. So I wanted to look at what I could find out about our Arapaho men and what we could share with our tribe to help our people be successful. Females also scored higher on resiliency measures, and family and social and school support highlights a need to provide more supportive structures, specifically for our male students. So as you're out there working in your community or even with your own relatives, pay special attention to our young men. Next slide. Another study by Rudder and 87 established 4 protective processes that foster resiliency. One was to alter the risk or child's exposure to the risk, break the cycle that follows exposure to risks, develop positive self-esteem and self-efficacy, and create positive opportunities. These efforts are encouraged to empower students to follow pathways for successful outcomes in their life. Some suggestions for schools on the next slide. Schools need to help become more resilient. Resiliency can be facilitated by educators and the school system in general. This includes increased opportunities for youth leadership, meaningful involvement of the parents in school or grandparents in my case, appropriate professional development, viewing children with strengths rather than deficits and risks that are in their life, nurtures their protective processes so they can succeed. Staff knowledge and skills can be developed to provide all of this. Schools need to develop positive attitudes toward resiliency. Stakeholders, here's another typo, I'm going to have to go back and fix a lot of this. Understand that the school as a unit can foster resiliency. Make information about development of resiliency readily available. Teachers need to understand that they can make a real difference in the student's ability to acquire resiliency skills. The next slide. Some recommendations for educators. This is by Cheryl Fenstein, Christopher Driving-Hawk, and Jewel Bartman. Included goal setting, in particular career education, is as an integral part of curriculum. And I often shared that when I was going to school, I was never taught or told by any of the teachers that I could become what I do now, or I could be a teacher, or that I could be anything. I really feel that because we had so many non-native teachers in our schools that they didn't see anything for us. And I really hope that that's changing now as we get more native teachers in our schools. Encourage participation in extracurricular activities, ensure that teacher preparation supports and meets the students' emotional and social needs, and establish a curriculum should be in concert with Native American culture to build pride and self-respect. Next slide. Looking at our stakeholders. The research also shows that a lot of our students start to lose interest in academics about in the 4th grade. So that is where we really want to focus attention to if you're working to help someone. Stakeholders include the schools, the family, the community. Without proper support, research shows that at-risk students get overwhelmed, lose motivation, and can give up. Resiliency needs to be promoted through school, family, and community efforts and not independent of each other. Resiliency should be promoted through all avenues. Next slide. Current conditions and efforts. Garrett in 2014 pointed out that boys tend to seek the help of outside sources from teachers and helping professionals in school and from school staff. Mental health providers and researchers often lack recognition of special needs of ethnic minorities. Cultural ignorance on part of the service provider is the main reason for high treatment dropout rates and underutilization of help-seeking behaviors among Natives. Native youth are likely to seek help from family members. So, I've learned throughout my research that this is just a traditional cultural practice. Whenever I had problems, I often went to grandma and grandpa and would talk to them about my problems. And I always thought it was so cool how they seemed to have the answer and knew the right things to say when I was having something that I was wanting to talk about. Native youth, they will go to family members. Boys seek outside resources, such as school staff. My own son, I think it's the girls' basketball coach, was somebody that he feels was really supportive to him when he was in high school. Girls seek help from parents, friends, or no one, or a teacher. So those of you that are teachers, you know, that you can help too. Many seek help through traditional healing practices and Indigenous ceremonies rather than mental health professionals. Next slide. Some common presenting issues, a summary of common presenting problems for Native youth in school and mental health settings that I found from an article by Herring, dated in '99, mentions the failure to develop strong ethnic identity and self-identity. Adverse effects are misperceptions about Native people. Adverse effects of discrimination and hatred toward Native people, both generally and specifically. Distrust of European American school and helping professionals based on historical negative interactions. Nonverbal communication style, conflicting with European Americans' verbal expectations. Lower academic achievements after the 4th grade, and an inability to reconcile Native cultural values with mainstream values. So it takes a being able to function in 2 different worlds. And it's very important to be able to give our students a name. And I'll share again, when we did our work on the reservation, a lot of our youth didn't have Indian names. So because we had an elder involved in our program, we often would do what we could to facilitate that process for those young people to get a name, because it gave them a sense of pride and they were proud and honored to get a name. We go to the next slide. Some more presenting issues for adolescents is a failure to develop a positive ethnic identity and self-identity, reactions to stereotypical misperceptions of Native people, communication conflicts, conflicts between family, loyalty and peer pressures, effects of misunderstandings and misperceptions of school personnel, poor academic achievement, substance use, adverse effects of discrimination and bias, and generations conflicts resulting from varying degrees of acculturation. And what I read in my research on college students was that acculturation in itself is a great stress for college students, particularly ones that come from reservations and having to adjust to Western style of education, where I often felt like when I first went to college that I just entered a whole new world because it was so different from home. We can go to the next slide. Some specific recommendations. Again, it's important to be strengths-based. Address openly the issue of dissimilar ethnic relationships rather than pretending that there's no differences. Evaluate their degree of acculturation of the client. Schedule appointments to allow flexibility and ending sessions as needed or starting late. And when I work on the reservation, I often scheduled up to a half an hour between sessions, knowing that somebody might show up late and they would have a reason for being late. So a lot of people, we call it Indian time. So I always point that out, that that's important. Be open to allowing extended family to participate. Allow time to trust to develop before you focus on problems. Use strategies that elicit practical solutions to problems and focus on the positives and strengths as a rule. Respect the use of silence. Sometimes before we respond to anything, we need a little bit of time to process that and think of how we want to say what we need to say. Explore ethnic identity issues as needed, and always, always maintain the highest level of confidentiality. For anyone to trust you, they need to know that they can tell you and you're not going to go and repeat that. And to listen with your heart and to listen with your mind. The next slide. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. These slides will be available to you and you can finish reading through the rest of them. I had so much to cover that I didn't include a lot of pictures in here. And so I just now looked at the time. If you heard my timer go off, I just wanted to share that this is something that I read and I thought it was really neat that I wanted to share. If you could scroll down to slide 42. It's called Circles Within Circles. Anyone who has ever had the opportunity to experience the colors, movements, sounds, tastes, and smells of the powwow understand the feeling that passes through you. It's different for every person, but if you really experience the feeling, you know it's that connection. Seeing old friends, making new ones, the image of the dancers moving in seemingly infinite poses of unity to every pound of the drum, laughter and exchange of words and gestures, silent inner prayer, and giving thanks to life, the delicious taste of your piping hot fry bread or stew, sounds of children playing, families and friends talking or laughing together. And I will thank you all again for taking time to listening today. It shows that you care about your people and that you want to make a difference and help your community be a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one question.
Okay.
This person said, I work as a youth counselor for the Yakama Nation. One problem I see is the lack of youth treatment centers and stabilization centers to keep the youth safe until a bed day is available. Do you see a future increase in opening youth treatment centers?
I would hope that there would be a future increase, and it's really sad. I can say that this is actually a problem that we have on our reservation. There is no treatment center, and I often feel that our children are put in foster homes and group homes as a form of treatment that I don't feel is real effective. And apparently a building was built on our reservation that was focused on treatment, and it wasn't just for substance abuse, it was to help youth with mental health problems. And sadly, in the end, that building is still sitting there because we're still trying to find funding to fund it. So it's like that with adults here in Wyoming, not just on the reservation. When somebody needs to go to residential treatment, I have to tell them that we're looking at least a month wait because we're so full, so I would hope that would happen for everybody that needs it.
Yeah, definitely. Looks like that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
But yes, thank you so much for presenting today, for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience for being here as well. We love to see you all attending, and we all hope that this was helpful for you. Awesome. We have another presentation next week with Dr. Garcia as well. So please be sure to visit our ATTC website and our MHTTC website. And you will be receiving a follow-up email in the next few days with instructions for your CEUs and with the handouts and recordings of this. So thank you so much for attending, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you.
All right, have a wonderful day, everyone.